Hi everyone, Caoimhin here from CIT's Blackrock Castle Observatory, and good morning. We are looking at the morning sky for this video, and currently we are looking down into the south. It is morning time, so figuring out where south is, well, you won't have Orion to help you. Over the next couple of mornings, we instead have this group of stars, this constellation, one very bright reddish orange star in the center, with a few bright stars curving in front of it and a few more bright stars leading away. This is the constellation, and I'm sure it's very obvious from these four slightly squiggly lines that this is meant to be a scorpion. This is the constellation Scorpius, and it's going to be down very close to the south about 4 o'clock in the morning over the next couple of mornings. The big reddish star there in the center is Antares. It's the brightest star in the constellation of Scorpius, and as we come a little bit closer to 4:30, it's going to come right up to due south. So there's Antares right in due south, just as we're coming up to about 4:30. And if we take a look slightly further to the east, we'll see that there's three quite bright objects. One of them is going to be brighter than any of the stars that you're seeing in the sky. That right there is Jupiter. Venus is the brightest object we will see in the evening sky for the next few evenings, but Jupiter is our brightest morning object. Just next to Jupiter, we have two other bright dots. We're going to take a slightly closer look here, so that we can see the colour of those objects. One of them is going to be quite pale, almost yellow, whereas the other is going to look a little bit more orange, almost red. And if we bring up our labels, that's Saturn and Mars just next to Jupiter. Now, Mars and Saturn are not brighter than the brightest stars. One of the good ways to figure out if you're looking at a planet is to check if it twinkles. Stars will twinkle or flicker in the sky because as their light is coming through our atmosphere, movement in the atmosphere, changes in temperature, they'll bend the light of the stars. Whereas the planets, they're so much closer to us. Even though they look quite small in the sky, they take up a little bit more room than the stars, simply because the planets are much closer to us than the stars. So light from the planets, it doesn't get as noticeably distorted. So that light coming through our atmosphere, it does get bent a little, but it's not as noticeable because there's more of an area of light. So we have Saturn, Mars and Jupiter there. We're nice and visible above the southeast as early as 20 to 5. But 20 to 5 is still a little early. If we push a little bit later, coming a bit closer to 5 and even a little after 5, we're now starting to get that nice orange glow in the sky, but Saturn, Mars and Jupiter, they are still there. We can also see, just next to Saturn and Jupiter, this shape in the sky, which I think looks almost like a teapot. There's the handle, there's the spout, there's the top of the teapot. It does have a few other strange lines coming off it, and that's because it's not meant to be a teapot. This is Sagittarius, the centaur with the bow and arrow, but I always find it almost impossible to imagine a half-man, half-horse firing a bow and arrow. Just looking at the stars, it reminds me a lot more of a teapot with that handle there at the back, and then this little angular spout over at the front. So we've got Sagittarius and Scorpius, two very famous constellations down towards the south, and then we have our three planets, Saturn, Jupiter and Mars. And we can see that Saturn, it's a little bit further to the east than Mars or Jupiter. It's a little bit closer to the sunrise, not by very much, so it won't make too much of a difference, but it's good to look at Saturn and Mars first and then move on to Jupiter. They're a little fainter, so they'll disappear from our sky just a little bit quicker. So we're zooming in here on Saturn. We can see the name Iapetus coming up at the side, but the little orange dot that we can see next to Saturn, that is Titan. Titan is Saturn's largest moon. It's bigger than the planet Mercury, so Titan is a massive, massive moon, big enough to have its own atmosphere. Its atmosphere contains a lot of methane and ethane, which gives it this nice orangey colour. Looking a little bit closer at Saturn here, we're still using a reasonably small telescope, 7 or 8 inches across. We can see a dark space between the round shape of the planet and the more oval shape of its rings. It's still a little difficult to see, and with smaller telescopes it will be, But as we go up to bigger and bigger telescopes, it gets easier and easier to see. I'll get rid of those names, we won't see those through a telescope. But it gets easier and easier to see that Saturn's ring is definitely separate from the planet. And even with the telescope just 10-15 inches aperture, we'll start to see there's a dark gap running through the rings, not between the planet and the ring. That becomes more obvious when we take a closer look, and a view this good takes a ridiculously big telescope, a meter or so across, if you want to get a view with this much detail, with those lovely bands breaking up on the inside, these dark gaps inside the rings. These are all indications that Saturn's ring isn't solid. It's more like a disc-shaped cloud of dust and rock and ice, millions of separate pieces orbiting around the planet. Saturn also has an amazing number of moons. It's got 82 of them as of last year. A group of American astronomers discovered an extra couple. We've discovered so many moons around Saturn, we've had to name them in a few different languages. Most of the names you're seeing here come from ancient Greek, but we now have two Irish names orbiting around Saturn, Fionn and Caoimhin. So Fionn and Caoimhin are two Irish names, and they're the names of two moons that are orbiting around Saturn at the moment. Zooming back out, we're going to now take a closer look at Mars instead. Luckily, you won't have to move your telescope very far. They're very close together in the sky. Mars is a lot smaller than Saturn, so we're going to have to zoom in a little bit more to start seeing some detail. But Mars is also a lot closer to us than Saturn, and that makes things a little bit easier. So we're still zooming in here, taking a closer and closer look at Mars. We're starting just now to see Mars's two moons. So Mars has two moons, Phobos and Deimos. They're both incredibly small. Yeah. And Phobos and Deimos, they're very lumpy and bumpy. There's a good chance that Phobos and Deimos were asteroids that Mars's gravity captured. We can also see some of the dark, mountainous, rocky areas and some of these paler, lower down areas that are filled with the sand and dust that carries rust, iron oxide, the same rust that we have here on Earth. That's what gives Mars its lovely reddish colour, but we mainly see that reddish colour in the lower areas, the plains and the valleys. So zooming back out from Mars and finally coming to Jupiter, our last and brightest planet in the morning. Jupiter is a little bit fainter than Venus, but still brighter than any of the actual stars in the sky. And again, starting with quite a small telescope, tomorrow morning, and we're looking at Saturday morning here, we can see 4 of Jupiter's moons. Jupiter's got 75 moons at our current count, but there's 4 large ones visible tomorrow morning. If we take a look at Sunday morning, it only looks like 2. And this is because Jupiter's moons are always orbiting around it, changing positions. If they go behind or in front of the planet, you won't be able to see them. So it's a good idea to go out and look at Jupiter on a couple of different nights. And if we come up to a bigger telescope, we'll certainly see Jupiter's stripes tomorrow morning. These are bands of gas in its atmosphere. But Sunday morning, that's when we will see the Great Red Spot. I will zoom in a lot closer. This would require a large telescope to see. But there's the Great Red Spot. It's a huge hurricane, big enough to swallow 2 planet Earths. But it's not visible tomorrow morning. You'll need to wait until Sunday. So they are the 3 planets that we've got in the morning sky over the next couple of mornings. And if 4:30, 5 in the morning is too early for you, well, here we are at just about 6 in the morning. Saturn, Jupiter and Mars are still visible. As we come past 6 o'clock, they're going to vanish. And as we come up to 7:15, they'll be gone from the sky. And that brings us all the way through the morning time. And I hope you have a lovely day.